Sure. Don't look at that. All right. So hello again, everybody. My name is Dustin Honig, and we are on to part 3 of the 3-part CKD nutritional series. So as you probably can tell, the topic for this today is going to be on cooking while on dialysis. And what we're going to go over is basically ways to make cooking more enjoyable and healthy, even though there are restrictions while you're on dialysis. All right, so cooking, we're going to talk about why this is going to be better than pre-made and processed foods. So cooking is almost always the superior choice because it can help to provide better nutrition when compared to pre-made and processed meals. Pre-made foods generally use a far greater amount of preservatives to keep the food fresh, and many of these include sodium, potassium, and phosphates, all of which we want to limit on a daily basis from our diet. Processed foods are kind of problematic because they also generally high in preservatives and also have fats, sugars, and empty calories. So their nutritional value is inferior, generally speaking, to when you cook your own meals, especially if the meals are balanced. Cooking and meal prepping basically allows you to better tailor your diet so that you can follow specific meal patterns and adhere better to nutritional recommendations. Cooking gives you basically more control over what you're eating versus just picking something that's pre-selected and I guess looks fresh and might be good, but even though it might look good, it's not going to give you nutritional value. So you can have cooking give you the best of both worlds. So cooking methods are something we're going to start with. I kind of broken them down to the healthier methods that might not be as healthy, and that maybe we want to limit more so on a regular basis. So healthier cooking methods generally include baking, steaming, poaching, blanching, stir frying, and as may be surprised by, microwaving is actually not as unhealthy as what is portrayed by most people out there, especially a lot of people that are not educated onto the topic. Microwaving is actually an acceptable cooking method, especially when compared to other methods like pan frying, deep frying, smoking, which has problems of its own. Frying basically it uses a lot of fats, unwanted fats, carbs. In general, it's not healthy. Boiling, problem with boiling is it generally causes loss of micronutrients. Boiling is not inherently unhealthy, but it can cause you to lose some nutrition from your foods. And in addition to this, as I mentioned at the bottom, the tip is through use of any cooking method, when you overcook foods, and particularly vegetables, it can result in the loss of nutrition. So when you're cooking your vegetables especially, less can be more. This is for flavors. So there are a ton of condiments, seasonings, dressings, all of which contain salt. And that is a problem because sodium restrictions when you're on dialysis may cause that to not be, like consumption of these products to not be ideal. And also salt substitutes are also out there, and they should generally be avoided unless they're approved by a dietitian or your physician. So this causes a problem because salt is one of the most commonly used seasoning on foods around the world. So whenever you have that taken away or reduced, in this case, it may lead to problems with food not tasting as good. So how do we add flavor? The main ways that we can do this are wines. Depending on the type of wine, there's red wines, white wines, and there's dry wines and sweet wines. Dry wines typically are better for foods that are savory. Sweet wines are generally better for sweet foods and desserts. Citrus juice and zest. Citrus fruits can be a problem if you eat too much of them because they have a high amount of potassium, among other things. But if you use just some of the juice or the zest, which is the skin, it can contain a great amount of flavor while minimizing some of the extra nutrients that you want to avoid too much of, such as potassium. And there also are ton of different herbs and spices that can be used to add flavor to foods. Now it's garlic, all the components of Italian seasonings, which could be basil, thyme, pepper, you use rosemary, paprika, ginger, cinnamon, and chili are all different herbs and spices that can be used for various foods to add a lot of flavor and other texture and mouthfeel properties that make food enjoyable. And for all those, I have a handout that we'll go over later that kind of gives you some ideas of maybe some foods that you might want to try some of these herbs and seasonings in, just for, experiment to see if you enjoy. But for now, we're going to keep going with where we're at, and we're going to move on to cooking oils. So there's a lot of debate on what is the best, what is the worst, why oils are unhealthy, why they are healthy. They spin all over the place. I'm going to kind of clarify that a little bit. So when you're cooking food, the oils and the fats that you want to avoid the most are animal fats, saturated fats. Those are found on any animal, pork, beef, chicken. And you also want to try to avoid hydrogenated oils such as margarine for things like trans fats. Trans fats are bad for a variety of reasons, and you want to limit those as much as possible. So the best thing to do is to look for healthier choices when cooking. And some of the best choices are olive oil and safflower oil. These two should be included on a regular basis just because of the types of fats that they contain are generally considered to be healthier types of fats if eaten in moderation. In addition, it's also a good idea to try to get an oil that's a good source of omega-3s, such as flaxseed oil or walnut oil. And that's because most people, especially in America, have a extremely high consumption of omega-6 oils, which is most of your cooking oils, compared to omega-3 oils. And that's can be a problem in terms of inflammation. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory, mostly. Omega-3s are mostly anti-inflammatory. So if you include some of the anti-inflammatory oils, it can kind of help control general inflammation in the body. So it's good to try to include some sources of that, such as flaxseed oil and walnut oil. But no matter what type you use, it's always best to try to use a modest amount when using any type of cooking method. A lot of these oils can have health benefits, but like anything else, when you eat them beyond moderation and consume them in excess, their health benefits can be maybe less beneficial, or they can have some health detrimental properties as well. So everything you want to try to consume in moderation, and the cooking oils are included. All right, I got another debate. So fresh versus canned versus frozen. What's the best? There's a lot of debate about what's the healthiest choice, and this, maybe there is not necessarily a healthiest choice for everybody, but for chronic kidney disease patients, especially those on dialysis, it's best to stick with the fresh and frozen and avoid canned foods. So canned foods, the reason why they should be avoided is because they're generally high in sodium, simple sugars, and potassium. So sodium and potassium we want to keep in check because there are electrolytes that can be secreted as well. And sugars especially should be controlled if you're a diabetic or if you have bouts of high blood sugar that are affecting your kidneys. So canned choices may not be the best choice. But they can be acceptable in moderation if they're low or no sodium. So we want to stick with fresh and frozen choices, and this is also because they're not preserved the same way canned foods are. So there are less restrictions on these types of foods. So when you have fresh and frozen, they're always going to be lower sodium. To some extent, they might be lower potassium. They're not going to have any of the additional added sugars or preservatives that might contain phosphates, among other things. But for these, it's always good to wash your fruits and vegetables. It's something that it's easy, and beyond just chronic kidney disease alone, it can provide some health benefits because there's going to be pesticides unless you're going organic, or other types of things that may or may not beyond the fruit or vegetable that you might want to clean off. So just some brain food. So sticking with fresh and frozen is the way to go if you have chronic kidney disease. Protein, so we dipped into a little bit on the last lecture. We talked about good sources of protein, which we mentioned mostly meats, poultry, eggs, things like that. That's because they are complete proteins. And if you guys wanted a better definition than I think I gave out last time, basically the complete proteins are all those that have all the essential amino acids, which there are 9 of. And incomplete proteins do not have all of them. The essential amino acids are the parts of proteins that the body needs to perform the vital functions and cannot make by itself. These proteins need to be consumed in the diet for use in the body. So the non-essential amino acids can actually be manufactured in the body, which is why consumption of these is less important on a regular basis. But the 9 essential amino acids cannot be manufactured in the body and therefore need to be consumed through foods to help your body perform normal functions. And like I said, eggs, meat, poultry, and fish are great choices of these. Vegan sources, if you're a vegan, are soy and quinoa. Quinoa may not be the most optimal choice, but if it's consumed in moderation, it could be acceptable. That's just because of the main problem with it is the potassium content. There's a fair amount of potassium in quinoa. So if having too much of that may cause too much potassium buildup in the body, which can be a problem. So just it's good to always, moderate your amount of certain foods, but they can be acceptable. Soy would probably be the optimal choice if you're a vegan. So in general, you want most of the dietary protein to come from the complete protein sources, just because you want to make sure you're getting all of your amino acids so your body can do what it needs to do. And dairy products, which may be misleadingly mistaken as healthy for people with chronic kidney disease because they have a great amount of calcium, there's vitamin D in there, there's definitely protein in there, but unfortunately, there's a lot of phosphates in there. So even though it has some of these other nutrients that might be good, phosphates, the problems that can come with phosphate buildup in the body can potentially outweigh some of the nutritional benefit that you get from dairy products. So sometimes, in general, dairy products would be best to avoid. Well, look at that. I said that already. I guess I was just jumping ahead of myself here. Yeah, we want to avoid them. Phosphorus, and as I did mention earlier, they also generally are going to have a good amount of potassium and sodium almost always throughout dairy products. You'll find a fair amount of sodium. So if you're on dialysis, you want to limit, the recommendation is to limit your dairy intake to a half a cup. That's of milk or yogurt. Or if you're using cheese, 1 ounce of cheese. And this is one or the other, So not a half a cup of milk and an ounce of cheese and a half a cup of yogurt. Try to do 1/2 cup in total or 1 ounce in total of those different items. Fruits and veggies, we're going to continue through the food groups. So these are going to be a very prominent part of most healthy diets, and that is no difference for chronic kidney disease dialysis patients. However, these types of patients and people with these ailments might want to avoid certain fruit and vegetable choices. And there, as far as fruits, there's just a little bit more restrictions in the fruit category than there are in vegetables. But some of the great fruit choices that are low in potassium and phosphorus are grapes, cherries, berries, and that's all kinds, including blueberry, raspberry, strawberry, apples, pineapples, and peaches. Vegetables, there are going to be some restrictions in vegetables. We will dip into those as we get to the handout. But there's less overall in that category, and more foods are acceptable than not. We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get here. Oh, that looks awful. Wow, that's really blurry. So this is going to be the handout, and we're still going to do it. Whenever I print it out, it's going to be beautiful. This is another cheat sheet for you. So this is ways to add flavor while still meeting nutritional recommendations. So the top, I briefly talked about salt and substitutes. You want to avoid adding salt at the dinner table. You want to limit what's put into your recipes when it's cooking. as a general idea, if you want 2 grams of sodium in a day, that's about the amount of salt you'll see in 1 teaspoon, which is incredibly misleading to some people. Most people have no idea. 1 teaspoon is generally the daily recommendation of sodium for almost all adults, and especially those with chronic kidney disease. And salt substitutes, as I mentioned, should be avoided unless they're approved, just because they can have issues of their own. So definitely make sure if you want to use some of those, run that by your dietitian or physician. So for the herbs, all right, this is killing me. Oh, goodness. All right, so I don't have these memorized as well as I should, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do filter through. We go to this because we still got it. Yes, that is the stuff. Isn't that better? It's beautiful. I made that myself. Okay, so for the herbs, I actually have a bigger list and tells you what a little bit about the herbs taste like, which is for a lot of people not that helpful. But there's also a list of most foods that it's good with. So basil, bay leaf, caraway, curry, dill, ginger, marjoram, oregano, rosemary, thyme, sage, and tarragon. Big list of herbs. There are a ton more than that. Some of which you might want to avoid for various reasons, like potassium content or phosphorus content, among other things. But all the ones listed in here are usable. And most of them have a minty taste, pepper, bittersweet, spicy, earthy, lemony, all kinds of stuff like that. Many, many different types of flavors. Each is which is specific, and you can always reference in case you forget, which I always do because there's a lot. But as you start using them with recipes, they become set, like for, you know what you're doing. You don't have to reference this after a while once you get a couple of recipes. But a lot of them are good on meats. There are certain vegetables a lot of them are good with. Some are good in combination with others. It just depends on what you're trying to make. And there are a slew of recipes online that you can find for chronic kidney disease recipes, excuse me, that use a lot of these. You'll see these in many different recipes, and it'll give you the amounts to use, and you can actually try them with and without certain herbs or seasonings to see how the taste is, how it differs, and mouthfeel, textures, things like that. But definitely worth experimenting with. Definitely a lot of great combinations you can make with those. The seasonings, you'll have things like cinnamon, garlic powder, onion powder, or fresh. I do like the powder better generally just because I think you'll get a little bit less potassium through these vegetables. But the taste is better with the fresh. So moderation is key. Also pepper and paprika. So a lot of these you'll get spicy, you'll get a little bit sweet. Many are going to mix the vegetables once again. Things like cinnamon, on the other hand, could be very good in other dishes like desserts or dishes with certain sweet foods. Cinnamon pairs great with sweet. So wines, I mentioned wines before. You have the dry and the sweet, and you have red and white. So typical go-to if you're making most dishes with like a sauce that you want to add the wine to, you want a dry white. If not, you probably are going to want a dry red. Dries are most often used in savory dishes, which is how you would describe many types of sauces as savory. When sweet wines can be used, they actually have a great deal to use, but that's more so for sweet dishes and desserts. Those pair, since they are sweeter, with other sweet types of foods, whereas the sweetness might be overpowering in other types of dishes, may affect the overall taste of the whatever you're putting it in. And the other, we have the citrus zest. That could be like lemon, lime, orange zest, all the different types, and they'll give like a sharp, bittersweet taste. Fantastic in sauces and marinades, and even vinegar. Vinegar is fantastic in a lot of dishes with its sharp, tangy flavor. Lots of sauces and different vegetables or vinegar can be used with and actually add a great deal of yummy taste that you otherwise wouldn't get with just using salt. So with this, it's actually kind of fun because you can get a slew of different flavors and combinations. They're endless. When you're just using salt on a regular basis, salt is always good, but you're very limited on the types of flavors that you're going to get with that, because if you want something to be salty, you may not want it to have all these other different types of tastes. So lots of fun to have with this, lots of experimentation, lots of good foods. And that worked out good. And, oh, ha ha ha. That's it. That is all of it. That is chronic kidney disease, hemodialysis, nutrient recommendations, cooking. So for cooking, it's always advised, in hemodialysis, try to cook and consume food choices that are part of the renal diet. So that's avoiding your potassium, too much sodium, avoiding too much protein, and avoiding too much phosphorus. Now, renal diet increases the consumption of healthful foods that are limited in these items, as well as liquids. And there are many healthful methods of cooking and different ways to add flavor to foods so that they can all be healthy. They can be a part of your renal diet to support your kidney health, and they can be delicious. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. That is the last part of the presentation. And I hope this helped clarify a couple things between chronic kidney disease, nutrition, and cooking. Thanks again.